I'm going to sit here and teach you how to process a kick drum. Also, wanted people to know out there that this is some great stuff that we're venturing into. Our goal at iMix and Master was there's a lot of guys that ask me when I do mixes and stuff, man, where'd you get that kick drum? Because I might, venture into comping a kick drum or doing something like that. So this is for everybody's benefit. We're putting these loop packs on a site called Loop Gurus. Loop Gurus is the front page, okay? So if you want to put your own stuff on there, put your MP3s on there, and just try to, you can make a few dollars. We're not taking some huge commissions. It was sort of just a community page. But on that, we have this page called Loop Packs, and it's in the top right, I believe, or it's actually, I have the co-founder of this, Mihai, that is literally changing it up, trying to make it the best it can be. So we have a Loop Pack store. If you're having troubles finding it, or which you shouldn't have, but we're putting these loop packs on. We made an 808 kit, and I did a video on YouTube about that, and I try to show you how we process 808s, but I'm going to show you how we process a kick drum. Now, in this situation, this is more like a hit that'll come in this this Kickaholics kit, we're going to call it. But this one's more of like a effect, really. But it's pretty cool. Now, here's the cool part about kick drums. Number one thing to get a killer kick drum, which I'm going to actually do some EQ on this as well, so you can see this. You're not going to see the EQ right now, but I'm going to cut it. You'll hear it. I can tell it's like in the 600 and then the 4K. Yeah, I don't want too much. You don't want too much to... Now that sounds like some... See, it went from a high-end hit to it sounds like a military stomp. So EQ is important, man. There's something in here that I just don't like, and it's up here. I knew it was. Yeah. Just too much. So let's cut this real quick, and I'll get into the compression. There it is. I like that. Okay. So what we're doing here is, let me show you on the screen after I talk about the liquid channel and how it's taking place. Now we got two of these liquid channels, they're side by side. But let me explain here. Here was the gain reduction going on. This is actually replicating a solid state bus compressor, and it sounds very, very good, by the way. There's a 10-to-1 ratio, so for every 1 over the threshold, it's actually, I don't like to say squashing, because then people perceive that as bad, but it is controlling at 10 dBs. Or 10 times, 10 times 1 over the threshold. If you're not a tech guy, just, first of all, we listen in really, really acoustically treated environments with some really killer speakers. And we can get these kick drums, because most people don't understand this, but the kick drum is pretty much the backbone of your song, along with the bass line. Now, so we have a -15 threshold. Here's how much gain. So I can use the line level to actually change the gain coming into the compressor. And then once it hits the compressor, I can actually use this thing over here called a side chain. And what lets me really zoom in on the sound, when you become really pretty decent as an engineer, you understand what you're trying to control and you know how to get there. So in this one, we take this and I'm actually side chaining the bass, and it's reducing, and I think it was around 2.5 to 3 dBs. The attack time is set to 1. If you're familiar with the bus compressor on an SSL, it goes from 1 to 3 to 10 to 30. So what we're doing is actually, it is a shorter attack time, but it's still not super short, but that's, you could have 0.1 and literally we'd be getting some pumping. 0.3 on the other hand is a little less, but let me explain something to you. If I had a 0.3 attack time in milliseconds, that means that compressor is going to come in 0.3 milliseconds after the sound is triggered. So literally, we're talking in milliseconds when we start talking engineering. Everything we do is in milliseconds and in small decibels, and they perceive humongous results when you can hear it. So the thing here is, I had it at 1 because it just sounded good with this sound. the longer the attack time, the more of a kick that's going to come through. So if you've got a real heavy kick in the beginning, you may want to set 10, a 10 millisecond attack, and I have an auto release going on, but you might want to set like a 100 millisecond release. And what's going to happen here is that's pop. I mean, we're going to get a real big punchy kick. So if I'm going through these samples and I find one that has this, I want to have a pop sounding kick drum, what's going to happen here is pretty much once the compressor hears the sound, you're going to have the attack a little bit later, and it's going to allow that kick to come through, and then right when that compressor hears the rest of this sound, it's going to actually proceed to shorten the sound and make it sound smaller and more punchy between the speakers. Vice versa, we're not looking for the punch on this, I meant the pop kind of kick on this, we're looking for the effect. So what I did was set it to 1 and an automatic release because I liked how it was working with it. Yeah, compression is a very complex thing that a lot of guys just... The number one thing that I deal with when a person starts compressing is they over-compress. There's a lot of reasons to that, and I'm going to explain it to you here in a minute. But I do want to go back over to the EQ section. So what we're doing here is actually side chain EQ. In the side chain of an EQ, what we're going to do is tell this compressor, hey, side chain this frequency range over to the compressor, and it'll be triggered off of that. So what we're doing is allowing me to boost the 100 hertz that I really want to get out of this to give it that kick punch low end without the low rumble end, and give a song a fill, like fill it up, and be able to boost that and dynamically control just that range. So let me step out here. I think that's the number one trick key component to making great kick drums, but it really does matter what you start with. There's a lot of layering that goes on great kick drums. There's a lot of time that goes into choosing kick drums, and what makes one sound great with your production, I'm going to tell you the secret to that real quick. So once we process this kick, which I'm going to do here, we're going to go to, I'm in Wavelab, by the way. So I'm going to go, trap kick 2, because this is a trap kit. We're going to hit OK. It processed that through. So now I can actually go through. I got 25 of these to do tonight. But it's for everybody's benefit, really. I do this because I, first of all, could go put it on an MPC and know for a fact, hey, this is that trap kit that I processed. Or I could send it to my buddy that makes some great production and say, here's the kits, that you needed. And he's like, thanks, dude. So it's literally, we're creating sounds that we know for a fact sound good between the speakers. So I wanted to get into that real quick. What makes it sound good between the speakers? And it's very simple, but it's very complex at the same time. Every speaker has its own frequency response. So every room has its own frequency response. So what happens most of the time in home-based studios, I think Ethan Weiner could explain this a lot better than I could, but what happens is you're listening back as a listener, especially in the bass frequencies, there's no doubt about it. So you're listening back and you hear this kick, and what you think is this great sounding, amazing kick is actually the corners of your room with the speakers and how they're placed in the room, adding another dimension to your kick drum. So your compression is pretty much you're compressing your room. And that's why acoustic treatment is highly important when we're talking about mixing. The other thing that a lot of guys are doing is there's one thing you can't replace, and that's preamplification or line level amplification or whatever you're using, whether it's a higher end preamp or whatnot. A lot of producers I know that have been very successful recording at home will grab 2 preamps with line level in, and they'll use those to their advantage to re-record their own stuff because they notice all of a sudden the image is better. It has more depth and space, and that's what a professional studio does. It adds this space and dimension that you just can't really put your finger on it. You're at home and you're like, why does their stuff always sound better? The great news for you guys out there is mixing, which I do a lot of, will add that space and dimension. So we do this, like I was doing to this kick drum, to everything we possibly can on the song, and we make the decisions and listen. So let me get back to what I was talking about. When you have the kick drum in a song, literally in this room, it sounds imaged. Now we're using these Symphony I/O converters and we're using these liquid channels right now. but it'll image the song to a point where I understand by looking at the phase scope that this thing's straight up and down. It's in the center of the speakers. I understand by hearing it in the center of the speakers that we're not having any kind of phasing issues. That's one of the biggest things that happens to kick drums, especially in rock bands and stuff. All of a sudden the phase is a little off with the kick drum. And it's not hitting like it should. The other big thing is there's too much kick in the kick. What I mean by that is there's too much lows in the kick. Or there's too much of the snap in the kick. There's too much of the low bass sub-frequency in the kick. There's too much. So what we do to make a great sounding kick drum is you even that curve out to where the frequencies are not, there's nothing that's super, super loud over the rest. Now, if that was the effect you're going for, we might need to decrease some of the frequencies around it to make that perceived to be that way. Then use the compressor. What is the compressor used for when we're talking about kick drums, bass lines, stuff like that? The compressor becomes a universal tool, okay? The compressor is used as much as an EQ in any production. The two biggest tools in engineering are that, and why we use them so much is because we're literally controlling air. We're controlling dynamics. We're controlling how much that converter, in this situation, in the symphony, is sending through these pieces and how that compressor is controlling the dynamics. The more the dynamics can be controlled, if you listen to a hip-hop, pop album, hip-hop, you understand this concept that the best engineers in the world understand how to use these tools to make this sound humongous. But at the same time, it's skinny and small enough so you can hear it in those little iBud, headphones. And it's like, how do they do that? Well, there was a 13-year, and I'm still learning, experience to do this kind of stuff. And if you took away my speakers and you took away this room, I'm not going to be able to do what I know God-given I can do. So it's like, it's the three-peat. It's almost like you need the converter, you need the hardware you're using, and you also need the speakers, as well as all the other stuff that goes into it. But let me explain this. If you put a guy that understands his room, understands his speakers, understands his interface, understands these things, and he starts compressing and EQing, that's when great sounds become, amazing. So, like, look at this. If you go on and you buy a loop pack with kick drums, 808s, there's no reason you shouldn't have a good foundation for a hip-hop track or whatever you're making. So anyways, to end this video, let's get into the compressor and really figure out what it does. If I'm talking about, we have different options on the liquid channel. One of the cool options is that it has nothing to do with compression, but I'm just putting it in there, is the harmonics. The solid state channels has a harmonic channel. Actually, a harmonic, it adds that warmth. Harmonics is how the tube was pretty much, or the transformer was acting with the box. So in a solid state case, when I add that harmonics from these liquid channels, what happens is it takes on this huge factor. Like, it's got this warmth. And a lot of guys ask me, how do I get that warm sound? Well, you buy a Manley MU. And no, what I'm saying is you have this vacuum tube feel to it. It's warm. It's not harsh. There's no frequencies that are just killing your eardrums. And that's why we pretty much invested in the massive passive in the Manley MU. But to stay on the subject of this, the harmonics that we add with these things will add this depth and dimension, and it's almost like it's got a room around the sound, and it sounds better. Okay, one of the things that plugins are starting to get better at, trust me, is the art of adding this kind of thing and being able to replicate that. At first, computers weren't fast enough until Pro Tools HD and all that stuff. And nowadays you can get a computer, but the faster the computer, the better the processor, the better the RAM, the better the audio converter, the better your sound. It's not just killer audio converter, horrible computer. The better your computer can process sound, the ones and zeros, the more it's going to sound like analog. A lot of people don't know that. So let's get into this. Okay, so now we have the threshold. The threshold really depends on the sound. A lot of guys go, where do I set my threshold? It's like, well, it depends on the sound. If the sound is only at there is no right or wrong when it comes to compressors. I'm really not a technical guy when it comes to this. I just twist the knobs until I get this sound that sounds ridiculously good, and I'm like, stop. That, I think, comes with a little bit of experience. So the threshold and the ratio, if you want to think about it in audio terms, when you start to move the threshold, start moving the threshold until you hear it. And then if you're new to compression, once you hear it, you're probably already done overboard. So cut it back, like 5. Or just twist it back a little bit until you don't really hear it. And then go back and forth until you keep hearing and hearing, not hearing and hearing. The ratio. The smaller the ratio, the less you're going to affect that sound. So the smaller ratios are used in mastering and stuff like that. Or if you really like the take, you're probably not going to try to alter it to that, If you're trying to make this glorified 808 kick drum sound, or just a regular kick drum, you might want to add a 10-to-1 compression ratio. If you're trying to add these tight, focused vocals, you might want to add a 7-to-1 ratio. 10-to-1 sometimes sounds a little bit unreal, but 7-to-1 sounds pretty good. But this all dictates the ratio and threshold have to work together, because if you have too much of the threshold, like if you're like at -40 or something, and you're trying to adjust your ratio, you're going to be, it doesn't matter if you're at 2-to-1 or 10-to-1, it's still going to sound like it's probably a little bit heavy depending on the sound. And I'm just referring to the sound we have here. So you have to go back and forth until you get that right. Now we start listening on the compressor from the attack and release. What people consider, it's over compressed, that really means you just compressed it wrong. And what I mean by that is the attack and release time were just a little bit off, and those little knobs you're twisting make a huge difference. So if you were at 1 millisecond attack, or you're at 30 millisecond attack on the same sound, the 30 millisecond might sound a million times better because it's letting that part of the sound come through before the compressor starts squeezing down on that sound. The other thing is this. This is why I bought the liquid channels. Now, I do have a lot of hardware in here for an independent studio, but this thing can replicate different boxes. It can replicate the stressors. It can replicate, I could just go on and on and on and on. It replicates the Manley that I own. It replicates LA2As and 1176s and all kinds of great stuff, but all these do the job different. And that's the cool part about compressors. They all have their own sound. And I think the greatest part about learning audio engineering, or realizing you need an audio engineer, is that's what they do. Great producers and great audio engineers understand this, and they understand if this guy sings this way or this guy raps this way, this kick drum needs to sound this way. So to end this video, the number one thing that I think is overlooked from new producers' standpoints is tuning the kick drum. If you have a beat going on and you think it's just amazing and killer, the number one thing that's going to make that kick drum sound muffled and muddy and not punching like a Kanye West album is the kick wasn't tuned correctly to the other instruments. So if you got a bass line it's got its own tune, and if you look at an MPC and study into an MPC, you can start to see why some of the greatest producers on the planet use them. Because the tune feature is very simple, and it's one of the most main key things, because sampled music needs to have tuning done, because one song might have been tuned one way where the other song was tuned another way, and you're taking a kick drum from this song and grabbing this song and doing this song, and you know what I'm saying? And then you're grabbing a sample off the internet. You got to make sure that they're tuned together. So when you have that tune, you might have this killer kick drum that you can't even hear the frequencies because the tune's off and it's making it sound muffled. So then it comes over here to get mixed, and I've had this happen. And I had a guy pay me $100 and something, and I told him, yeah, I'll check it out. And I told him this. I said, you really got to look into this. And it almost shocked him, like I was trying to disregard him. I was just saying, hey man, when I learned this stuff, I started learning how in-depth it is to make a professional instrumental. But if you're just buying, instrumentals off of SoundClick and putting some raps on them, there's nothing wrong with it. But at the end of the day, if you want professional stuff, this is what we're doing. And I wanted to give you insight on one of the main components of an 808 kick, or a kick drum in general. So, yeah, you got attack, release, you got harmonics, you have EQ, and most importantly, then you have tuning. So you have all these things that once you get that correct, that's something I can't tune the kick drum to your song yet. But if you use a great kick drum to start, you'll have less time in the mixing, and you'll also have a better result when your speaker and you listen to it in your car. Because the number one thing that people call me back on is when I don't comp their kick drums out of their mix, and they go, well, the kick drum, it's just not pounding, it's not hitting, it's not this, it's not that, and there's a reason for it. And it's because we're not processing the kick drum like we should and actually swapping it out. So that's why we're doing the Trapaholic kit, or whatever it's called, Kickaholics. Everything's with a holics. We'll see ya.